The views and opinions expressed in our program are those of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. All rights reserved. Are you searching for that voice of reason in these troubled times? Do some things just not make sense? We thought so too, and that's exactly how Dave, Richard, and I came together. My name is Kelsey, and the three of us are here to explore and seek the truth, expose corruption, and unravel and untwist media lies and propaganda. We are determined to help navigate through this unparalleled, extraordinary time in history with everyday people emphasizing open-mindedness, free thinking, and a desire to be empowered at the grassroots level, working with what nature has given us and protecting that from those who are exploiting it. Together, with the help of our listeners, we will sow acres of truth. You can visit our website at acresoftruth.com, and here you will find more information on how you can find us in places like YouTube, Rumble, Spotify and Apple Music, Twitter, and so much more. And welcome to our special edition series, SDG'S and What You Need to Know. Together, we will be explaining and discussing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our mission is to educate everyday citizens about SDGs, what they are, what they mean, how the laws and policies that are and have been passed can and will affect us, not only here in Canada, but around the world. Additionally, by learning and understanding these 17 goals, we can all become one step closer in helping to affect change in this world from a grassroots perspective. My name is Kelsey from Saskatoon, along with Dave and Richard. We are Acres of Truth. Joining us is our special guest, Mark, who has been talking about the agenda for 20 years now. Welcome, gentlemen.
Greetings, Kelsey. It's Dave from Winnipeg, Ag Specialist.
Greetings, Kelsey. My name is Richard. I'm a farmer from southern Saskatchewan.
Hi, Kelsey, Dave, and Richard. It's Mark here from Saskatoon, Director and Founder of the Forum for Canadian Sovereignty.
Welcome, gentlemen, and I'm Kelsey. I'm a small business owner in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. The format of this series is for us to read the SDG, discuss the targets, and break it down for everyday people to understand. Let's get started with Sustainable Development Goal number 12. Ensure sustainable consumption and production. Goal 12 is about ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns, which is key to sustain the livelihoods of current and future generations. Unsustainable patterns of consumption and production are root causes of the triple planetary crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. These crises and related environmental degradation threaten human well-being and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Governments and all citizens should work together to improve resource efficiency, reduce waste and pollution, and shape a new circular economy. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Mark for our discussion.
Yeah, this whole agenda in and of itself is, by definition, unsustainable. None of this is sustainable. None of these goals, if they were to achieve them, all 17 of them in their entirety, would be sustainable. None of it would be. The whole agenda is unsustainable, and so they need to use so much propaganda and so much narrative building in order to move this thing forward and pull at heartstrings and people's emotions to get them to, accept the policies that are flowing from this overall agenda. And it works, unfortunately. The propaganda works, and we're seeing it work. Just with the next goal that we're going to be talking about. That's going to be a perfect example for the propaganda they're using and the fearmonger they're using to achieve these goals. 12 is an interesting one.
Maybe I could jump in here, Mark. One of the targets for this particular SDG 10.1, implement the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production all countries taking action, with developed countries taking the lead, taking into account the development and capabilities of developing countries. Any comments on that?
So, this whole thing is it is relative to the next one that we're going to talk about. But when we talk about consumption and production, again, it's just another goal where they tell us they want to control the means of production and people's consumption. So this is where, you get support from the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, where he talks about, limiting your meat consumption, your beef consumption. It's only going to be, on a special occasion. It's only going to be a treat every so often. And in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in Alberta, we have a lot of people that ranch, and their whole livelihood is dependent on the beef industry, or even just meat, chicken, poultry, all of these different farms and ranches, and there's so many people that depend on a healthy market, and this is one of those ones where they seek alternatives to traditional protein like beef or chicken, and they want to replace it with crickets, and they're building these cricket farms where they want us eating cricket powder as a protein replacement. And again, it's this global entity, unelected, unaccountable, that is making these decisions, creating these cookie cutter policies for the globe without any consideration as to our traditional or existing industries in this country, i.e., ranching and farming, and they want to decimate that. And who's gonna go to the rancher and say, yeah, you know what? Sorry, but your industry is null and void. Your industry is no longer appropriate. Who's going to do that? Is it going to be Scott Moe and the Sass Party? Is it going to be Justin Trudeau? Is it going to be Pierre Poilievre? Who's going to tell these people this? That there's no longer a market, because we have managed through propaganda and fear mongering to control this narrative and to forward this narrative and to manipulate the masses into thinking that cows are bad and that meat is somehow bad, and we want to replace it with crickets, and we're going to build enormous manufacturing plants where we grow crickets and we crush them into powder, and that's what you're going to eat as a protein replacement. It's I, I struggle with this one. This is why I struggled at the beginning of this goal, because I struggle to see how anybody, any government, and I mean Trudeau's pretty brazen, but I can't see how they're going to accomplish this goal with how we are and our way of life in this country, and how we all appreciate a good steak every so often. We all appreciate hamburger. We appreciate our traditional protein, and we're going to continue to do that. I don't see how anyone in their right mind is going to be able to implement this goal and actually say they're achieving it without, obviously some heavy propaganda and heavy manipulation of the masses through obviously fear. But even with that, I think it's an uphill battle. I think it's one of these goals I don't see them achieving. I can't see them achieving this. And that's just Canada. Never mind the U.S. I mean, Americans love their meat. They love their beef protein, they love chicken. We love our chicken, pork, all of these things that they want to eliminate because, they say it's unsustainable. How about we let our farmers and ranchers figure out what's sustainable? They're the experts. They're the ones that have been doing this for decades, and there's no detriment, there's no consequence to what they've been doing. They find the best ways to raise food, they find the best ways to grow food. Let's let them do what they do.
Thank you for joining our Acres of Truth podcast. Dave, Richard, and I invite you to join in the conversation with us over on Twitter. Our handle there is @Acres of Truth. Stay tuned as more episodes are dropping weekly.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. As a producer, um, although I'm not in beef on the grain side, but I can talk a little bit. And I'm sure Dave will correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that basically this SDG, plays into, one of their private public partnerships again, and we're seeing actually corporations, and I don't think the government actually really has enough foresight to see what's going on, because we have these corporations that are actually squeezing farmers. I mean, because I think cattle price is still around $1.50 or $1.60, a pound, but yet we're paying $10 a pound for beef in the store. And it's like, wow, that's quite a margin. So it's actually the food processors that are taking up and the grocery stores, obviously, but I would say more the processors that are taking up all the profits. So they're actually making farms and ranches that traditionally just raise cattle and sold to the traditional markets. I think it's time as agriculture producers, we stop supporting these traditional markets and going to feedlots and selling to those food processors. And we actually start, making butcher shops again. And butcher shops buy it, local communities buy it right off the farm. And because there's too much profit going out and, being taken. That's what I think.
You raise such a good point, and again, that goes to this idea of radical decentralization, and that's how they're doing this, and that's how they're doing, with the multinationals and the food processors, and price fixing and artificially creating inflation when the market doesn't pan out that way. And so all of this inflation that we're witnessing is all manufactured, and people need to understand that, and we need to, like as you said, radically decentralize the market and the industry. And this isn't, and then not only the food industry, but of course all industries. We need to decentralize and get a little bit more local and start taking care of our own thing instead of depending on these multinationals and that are all playing along with this agenda. So yeah, great point, Richard.
Yeah, and I think to talk to you, Mark, and Richard as well, when we look at our farmers, I think you said it best. Our farmers do know what they're doing. Almost every producer that I am in contact with has at least a university diploma or a degree of some sort. They are experts in their field, and they are doing a tremendous good job of the tasks at hand, whether it's raising livestock, growing food, crops, whatever you name it. They're good at it, and they become experts at it because we're competing on a global scale. And I look at the pork sector, and you talked about your bug plants a little bit, because one of the goals is to produce based on the material footprint per capita and the material footprint per GDP. So those are interesting facts, because we look at Manitoba, and we've got hundreds of thousands of hogs that get exported to the United States, to China, and other markets. If we are suddenly not producing that protein, where is China going to be producing all these bugs to replace that protein? Because remember, China is not part of this deal, and they're already struggling with protein sources. The swine flu wiped out a lot of their breeding stock, and they're slowly rebuilding it, but not nearly to the capacity that they were pre this swine flu. So there's a lot of people shouting that we need beef, pork, poultry from markets that are able to produce them. And we do have real estate to produce them. We have the prairie. vast regions where we can have cattle grazed and raised on the farm. But you're exactly right. We need to open up local butcher shops. We are seeing a trend. Some of them are opening again, but permitting is a bit of an issue because the government is reluctant to give permits, especially with anything that goes across the provinces. Because I can only think of one producer in Manitoba here that has received a permit like in the last 10 years to export into provinces like Saskatchewan or Alberta or Ontario, because the regulations are that stringent, the processes are that intertwined and difficult. And I think that's by design.
Oh, all by design, and that's the thing. One of the things that stems from this goal is this over regulation, and I mean, once government gets their fingers into something, it's very hard to get them to ever let go, and it goes against every free market principle, and this, all of this leads to more government regulation, more control, and less free market. And it's not going in the right direction. It's not. In fact, it's going in the opposite direction. If we want to feed the world, if we want to continue feeding the world, and all of these policies, all of these things that they want to do, and by controlling production, by controlling consumption, is only going to work in the reverse and create more famine and more starvation and more hardship for humanity, which we know, based on what they've told us, that that's what they want. They want to radically depopulate the planet. And this is another mechanism for them to achieve that goal. And people really need to wrap their head around it and understand this.
Well, the other thing that we need to understand, and the everyday people need to understand, because we're being told that inflation is the cost of our food increase costs and so on. Well, if you look at any of the major corporations and you look at their quarterly reports, they are just staggering. And I just pulled this up here, looking at Walmart, up 2.73 billion with a B in one quarter. And so inflation at 8%, 9%, whatever the number happens to be, we all know full and well it's not 8, 9%.
No. And people, and you're 100% right. And this is where, I hear it lots. Inflation is on everyone's tongue because there's politicians talking about inflation and they want it to be on people's tongues. But they minimize why there's inflation. All of this inflation is in part due to all of the promises made to these multinationals who are all reporting record profits, right? And it's so all this inflation is manufactured. It's price gouging, it's price fixing. It's so all of these corporations that agreed to achieve this and agreed to ESGs flowing out of SDGs, here's why they did it. This is why they did it. This is why they're reporting record profits. And what's happening to us, the people, the small business owner, the little people, everybody around that's struggling to buy groceries, that are struggling, eat or heat, or whatever the situation is, or paying their mortgage or paying the rent or whatever. So many people are struggling because of the cost of living, and it's all manufactured, and we don't have to be here, but it's all relative to sustainable development. This is why I get so frustrated when I see conservatives saying that soccer moms in Toronto don't care about the SDGs or the World Economic Forum or any of this globalist stuff. They only care about inflation and the economy. Well, that just tells me that you don't know how relative all of this stuff is to the cost of living, inflation, and the economy. It's all connected.
So speaking of inflation and the cost of living, let's just talk about the grocery store for a second here. I have a 20-year-old daughter who's very frugal and budget conscious and kind of defeats the norms of the average 20-year-old. And she sent me a picture not so long ago about what she purchased and how much she paid for it. And she posed some really interesting questions. She asked me, what are they doing with all the food? And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, with prices like this, people can't possibly be still buying the same amount or the same type of food that they were before. So what's happening with all the excess food? And I recently had a discussion about this with Dave. And Dave, you had some interesting comments on this. And Target 12.3 by 2030 have per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. I just couldn't help but remember that conversation we had and thought maybe you might be able to speak a little bit more to that.
One thing that we need our audience to understand is that about 17 to 24% of food that is produced goes to waste. And some of this will happen on the farm before the product reaches the market. It will happen on grocery store shelves where a product is improperly stored, improperly packaged, or sometimes a consumer is going to open a package and leave it there and it'll sit on the shelf and nobody buys it. Other things will be restaurants, cutoffs, different ends where they order too much and they don't have a customer for it at the end of the day or at the end of the week. And so it'll get discarded or it'll be prepared. And once it's prepared, it again has a limited shelf life. So there's lots of factors that go into waste. And I want to focus in on two areas particularly. And the one is on farm, because that one is something that really bothers me. And I look at carrot production or celery production. When we produce celery, it doesn't come in this nice little bunch that you see with the two rubber bands in the grocery store with the tops chopped off. Celery comes in with huge stalks. It's probably about 8 to 10 inches, maybe 12 inches in circumference. And probably about 1/2 of that celery stalk is going to get left in the field to go to compost, and the nutrients will be reused in the soil for the next year's crop. But the consumer is demanding to see a uniform product every time they enter the supermarket. We talk about ugly fruit, and this was kind of a thing the BC apple growers were experimenting with a few years ago, where they would take subpar standard fruit, bag it, and then sell it at a discounted price. Well, that all flopped miserably because what was intended to be sold at a lower price, the retailer was actually charging more for it. And, again, we look at who's making that decision. And this is the corporations that are making this decision. They deliberately do not want this product on the shelf because it doesn't look as crisp and pristine as others do. And they don't want to be bothered with an extra SKU on their ordering card or on their shelf, because real estate on the shelf is very expensive and everybody knows that. So that's what's driving this. And I'll use the example of the pears in the grocery stores. I went into the food store just a few days ago, and pears are selling for $2.49 a pound. And I don't know what your market is, but in my market here in Winnipeg, that is extremely high. It's expensive. I'm used to $1.29, $1.49 a pound, and I'll buy a handful of pears just for myself, and we'll enjoy them. But now at $2.49, those pears are turning color. They're brown, they're spotty, and if you're going to eat one or buy one, you're going to need to eat it that day. But it's going to sit on the counter at your home for 2-3 days. It's not going to happen. It's going to turn bad on you. And so stores are throwing these products out. There is no longer a discount category at the grocery stores. We used to have them. I remember seeing them pre-COVID, where fruit or any produce or whatever, it was like, okay, if you buy it today, you consume it today, buy it for $1 a bag and take it home, because at least it's not going into the landfill. But now those shelves are not there anymore. And as I talked about earlier, is the real estate on each shelf is expensive, and retailers want to turn their product over for profitable. Not going to be doing it for $1 discounting a bag.
And this is such an opportunity for learning for people, because the virtue signaling that we're seeing in society that's being pushed by the media and by politicians, and people tend to file in behind them and scream their virtue and be cool like everybody else, but they don't understand the connection and why everything is getting more expensive, and and how many people are suffering because of this cost of living and inflation. And so people need to understand that all this virtue signaling that they're doing is the reason why so many people are struggling. And there's a disconnect between the perception that these narratives produce versus the reality on the ground, the reality of people's lives. And it's going to affect everybody sooner or later. And people need to recognize this. And I sure hope that, as they're listening to all of these, that some light bulbs go on, and people start understanding that all of this is manufactured. It's all manufactured because of this agenda.
Yeah, and you can't help but see the trend in each one of these SDGs. The gaslighting on us on this waste issue that they manufacture. That they're manufacturing these crises, like you are saying, Mark, and then people are falling for that and not realizing what led to that in the first place.
They can control that because they're basically, if they throw out 10 or 20%, and they know that they throw waste 10 to 20% of their product, they just raise that on the other 80% of their product to make up for that, and that's there's your increased price. So they really don't care. That's what they're doing.
Well, and here's the other thing that I think about, Richard. This waste, and as I talked about earlier, is you could potentially buy discounted fruit, produce for $1 a bag. But they need to create this as it's a complete write-off. And so they're able to produce on a spreadsheet how much food is actually wasted in order to prop up the numbers.
Do you know, any of you folks, if these grocery stores, do they have like a compost where they can separate, all of the food waste from, all of the paper and plastic and everything else that's being thrown out? Or is it all thrown into one bin?
So here's what happened in Winnipeg. And again, there was a huge outcry from the public because they were seeing, bags of potatoes and so on and so forth out at the curb. And so then what basically wound up happening is that got wrapped up. So food was no longer being put into, the regular blue or the garbage bins. Now it goes into a compactor and picked up by a contractor. So the consumer no longer sees what goes out the back door. And
You see, and and this is sort of my point in all this is there are ways that we can, through innovation and all these other ways to deal with some of, the negatives to this. And I don't know what they do with all of the food that's being composted. I don't know if they're, selling it back to the farmers, or the farmers are, or they're taking it to, I don't know where does it go to the landfill? I don't know. But there's ways that we can deal with, pollution. There's ways that we can deal with waste. There's things that we can actually do that would work in our favor. And I'm speaking, when I say our, I'm speaking about humanity and the planet. And so there's things that we can do and we should do. It doesn't mean we're throwing, because we're against this agenda, doesn't mean we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's other ways that we can do this, and leave it up to the people. The people will figure out the best way to deal with these issues and these problems. We've done it since the dawn of time, and we need to continue to do that.
yeah, and we will. And on the farming end, we're at the forefront of this because we're quick adopters of technology. When it comes to reducing waste, that's the perfect place to start because you're at ground zero, literally. And so the consumer, the expectations need to change slightly. I'm not saying you're going to be getting an inferior product. That's not it at all. But that you expect to go to your supermarket and you always buy a 2.23 pound bird for poultry, you want to cook that up, or that you have a turkey that's exactly 10.2 pounds. This is driving the producer to do everything in reverse. And we know that we can't always create a uniform product. And so the consumer needs to be a little bit more accepting and say, you know what? Okay, today that bird's going to be 2 pounds. The next time it might be 2.5 pounds. And I'm okay with that. But we are pushing the producers, because I see this happen on the farm. If that bird does not fit that size, it will go to another market. It will go somewhere else. And if it's too big or too little, it will get discarded. And particularly on the chicks, I'm thinking of a lot of our birds and stuff like that. If they are not producing in the first couple of days, first couple of weeks, and they're hitting their targets, the farmer is going to eliminate them. They are not going to get fed and raised to market size. And when we look at organic, because people think organic is better, and it's like organic does have a dirty side to it, and that is it, where the consumer will not see it. But we need to start thinking differently, looking at this food waste thing in a different capacity, and say, well, you know what, I'm willing to tolerate a little bit more to make sure that we're not wasting food and wasting resources, because they are valuable resources.
So I think part of the problem in all of that is nobody's telling the people the truth, right? Everything is created for palatability. Nobody's being told the truth. Nobody's being, and within that truth, then there's ways that you can deal with things. If people aren't being told the truth and everything is a lie, then of course it's just going to exacerbate the problems that exist.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and there's lots of things that we can improve on. And, as a producer, we can easily come to the table and say, here's some things that we really see that need addressing. And we are addressing some of them. And I look at technology in poultry, we now have a mechanism that we can sex the bird, whether it's a male or female, while it's an embryo. So those are technologies that come out. You look at our dairy has gone almost exclusively artificial insemination, where we're producing only female offspring. So because the male offspring have little to no value. And same with the layer barns. If you have male chicks, they are not of any value for layers. So they get eliminated very quickly. But that's the side where we can use some technology to really push us forward. And again, reduce waste, reduce costs, reduce everything, and produce a product that the consumer is willing to buy.
Right, but I mean, it's not on the farmer's side. The farmers are always price takers, and they will produce stuff to fit a market. And when we actually take food and we go on a mass distribution system, perishable food, there's a lot of waste because of this mass. Like one corporation across Canada, distributes food and processes food. It's very inefficient because of movements and shipping and all that other stuff. Where if it was localized, there wouldn't be a problem. It would actually get out to the grocery stores. It would get to your butcher shops. There wouldn't be near as waste. It's the mass production that's going on by the food retailers and the food processors. It's inefficient, right?
Well, and you would also be increasing the quality of the nutritional value of food. Like, think of a tomato that is grown in California, gets shipped to Canada. How many days is it going to spend in transport? How many days is it going to sit in a warehouse? And so when you're going to the grocery store and you're buying vine ripened tomatoes, like, are you kidding me? Do you think they're actually vine ripened? It's like, yes, they're on the vine, but they were ripened in the back of a truck or in the back of a warehouse somewhere, because there's no way you can transport them that many miles and expect them to be fresh. So if we would have local operations that would be growing tomatoes year round, you would have the nutritional value that you would expect from a tomato, not something that was harvested green, shipped halfway across the country, and here we go. Bananas are another example. Like, where do our bananas come from? We ship them halfway around the world through one or two corporations, and they manage the banana market. Oranges aren't much different, and papaya. You know, we have a lot of fruit vegetables that are controlled by one or two corporations and grown in a handful of countries.
But there again, with local bakeries, speaking of my own community, that's basically lost 2 grocery stores and a bakery. When we had a bakery, they would go into our local stores, grocery stores, and those bananas that were kind of turning, brown and blah, blah, blah. Well, the bakery would go in there, purchase those bananas and make banana bread, right? At a very reduced price. So it wasn't a waste actually. But now look what's going on.
Yep. So again, radical decentralization is the answer to all of this. Local, community, lowest common denominator. And again, they've created a lot of these problems through their model, and their model is not going to work. And we can see that, and we think we've proven that.
Yeah, and we can see that. If we look at target number 12.5, where we talk about recycling, and this is a topic that's worthy of a couple of minutes of our time, I think. When we look at how much time and effort we put into recycling, because you kind of alluded to this on the compost side for, vegetable. But in Manitoba, 81% of our people recycle as much as possible, whether it's a pop can, a tin can, soda can, beer can, you name it. 81% gets put into the blue bin. But the sad part is only about 13% of that will actually make it into a recycling facility where it will be repurposed, reused, or recycled in some way or another. The rest is going to get discarded, and it'll wind up in a landfill. It'll wind up in an incinerator, or get shipped halfway across the globe for somebody else to.
Right.
We have mechanisms we're paying to have a lot of the stuff done. And me as a consumer, I think, well, okay, if I'm putting 100% of my recyclables in the recycling, then I'm doing my part for the planet. And here we're realizing that not even a quarter of that is getting to where we think we're putting this money into. Like we think that this recycling program, every eco fee that we pay, should be doing something with this product, and we're finding it's doing nothing more than driving it to the landfill. So we should have put it in that same truck on day one, save the fuel for that recycling truck, because it's not happening anyway. So that is a serious point of contention. And again, we need to address that. And we also need to push manufacturers. And I'm thinking of Nestle water here at the moment, because the bottled water is a big deal. We need to create products that are easily recyclable or easily reused and can be recycled time and time again. To let these giant corporations produce a cheap product and not feel the effects of recycling and just dumping it. That's just not right, in my opinion. I think we can do better, and we ought to do better. And they're getting away with it.
So when we talk about all of that, how that relates to rationalize, this is 12C, rationalize inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that encourage wasteful consumption by removing market distortions in accordance with national circumstances.
At one time they promoted basically the oil industry with plastics and recyclables and that sort of thing. That's how we got away from glass bottles for safety issues. But really, is there any more renewable thing on the planet than glass? It's sand. So when you're talking about like why they did this with glass is under the guise of safety again. Yes, I realize there's a lot of irresponsibility going on with glass, but I mean, to recycle glass, it is much easier than recycling, plastic and so on and so forth, because it takes more energy to actually melt it down and reproduce it again than it does just produce it from new to begin with, because plastic is a byproduct of oil to begin with. So
the other thing is with plastics, it's not just that we have one type of plastic in one mix, because poly means many. So whether it's PVC or whatever, there's many types of plastic in there, and through the recycling process, they can't separate them out cost effectively. So effectively, they can't be recycled. But to your point on glass, Richard, like we should be going back to glass Because what we see glass being recycled in today is thrown in as aggregate in concrete, and so you can you can bury it, and it's it's all fine, good. There's no harm, no nothing. It's a great filler.
But again, it's one of these things where even so they've gotten rid of plastic bags that people reused. It wasn't a one-time use, and they continually reuse them. So they get rid of these plastic bags, and now they offer paper bags. Well, I thought we got rid of paper bags because we were saving the forests a long time ago, and now all of a sudden it's okay to to use paper again. It's just
Here's the other thing, Mark. I used to use the plastic bags, and I went dumpster diving. Walmart threw out pallets of them, and so I picked up a couple of cases and gave some cases to my neighbors and so on. But these plastic bags always serve multiple purposes. I would use them in my kitchen waste disposal and then toss them to the curb. Now I'm forced to go and buy a more expensive 10 mil plastic bag for a kitchen catcher, and I'm still going to toss it in the curb. So it's like, again, I'm putting out 2.5. It solves that. It makes it worse because I'm putting out more plastic because the plastic bags were fairly thin already. But I'm putting out more plastic to the curb now than I was before. But we should talk about Target 12.6 just for a couple of seconds, because the reporting and accountability that corporations are going to have to incorporate into this to get all on the sustainability reports, like that has to be just staggering. So like when like for CO2, because that's going to be the metric that they're going to be using, every company that is buying goods is going to have CO2 credits attached to it. Anytime they sell goods or produce something, they're going to have to evaluate how many CO2 credits or CO2 bits go into that production of whatever product, and what they're using for their facility, whether it's their heating, cooling, ventilation, all those types of things. And then accountability. They have to submit this to a government body. And then at the government side, we have a ton of employees that are actually processing this or filing it or doing something with it, and that all costs money, takes labor, and who's going to bear the cost of that other than the consumer?
Yeah, the consumer taxpayer. Yep, absolutely.
Not only that, but it says encourage companies, and I can't help but wonder when that will transition over to mandating companies.
Well, and it's always the taxpayer, it's always the consumer that pays for this behemoth bureaucracy that they're creating. It always flows to the lowest common denominator. It's always us that pays for it. It's always the people.
Feds will promise something, and we use this like as an egg. They'll subsidize something, and they'll say the federal government will bear 100% of the cost. Well, eventually it does trickle down to the provincial government, and more often than not, the provincial government is on the hook for an excess of 40% ongoing, because a lot of these programs, once they start, they don't stop. So the provincial government is on the hook. So now you have two tiers. And as we've talked about before on this program, is the government is extremely inefficient at getting anything for $1. So, they're getting less than 50 cents on a dollar for everything. So they're squandering. And again, it's just going back. We're paying double for something we shouldn't be paying anything.
But that goes back to your private public partnerships again. Is these bigger corporations are getting the subsidies, and it's wiping out your smaller businesses and mom and pop operations because they can't actually compete because they don't qualify for those government subsidies. So you're actually seeing big wealth transfer going on to these bigger corporations, right, from dear old governments again.
And where do subsidies come from?
You and I, my friend, you and I.
Yeah, right. There you go. So we pay again.
And the squeeze will be on companies that may have a moral or ethical standing and will not sign on to something. Because we saw this with different camps or different religious organizations. You had to attest to the LGBT2 or Q and that other alphabet soup in order to get federal funding. And the Tim Hortons, children had to meet certain criteria to get in. And it's like, are you kidding? It's mind-boggling. But
Are you enjoying this episode? You can find all previous episodes at acresoftruth.com.
I wanted to thank you, Dave, for clarifying the whole encouraging companies to mandating companies, because I just want to do a little bit of an overview here for the listeners in terms of how important it is because this is being marketed, they're campaigning on all of these SDGs in different ways. How are they campaigning on these? What are you seeing in the communities? What signage are you seeing? What are you seeing popping up in your sponsored ads on all your social media feeds? And how are they using those words? It's really important for people to understand the psychology behind all of this and the smoke and mirrors and the fluff and stuff that they're using. And you can see it right in the wording in all of these SDGs, because they make it look pretty, they make it sound like it's really good, and they make it really easy to virtue signal it, and they make it really good to make you feel like you should be participating in something that you have no idea about.
A lot of these companies are not sustainable without the government subsidies. They actually make a business plan based on those government subsidies, and they don't care if they go bankrupt. They're not here for a long time. They're here for a short time to extract the funds, to be it either their shareholders, or themselves.
And we saw that like with Shoppers Drug Mart. We've got billboards all over asking people to get the 2-in-1. We have huge halls, like big centers open up right now today. And again, this is done through Shoppers Drug Mart to go in and get your booster. And it's like, who's funding this? Because it would seem odd to me that only Shoppers Drug Mart is opening up extra facility. We have lots of pharmacies in Winnipeg here that all do it, whether it's a Costco, Walmart, or whoever, Sobeys. But the Shoppers Drug Mart stands out where they're actually renting extra space to do the booster shots.
Dave and gentlemen, to your point, I encourage, and I mean that in every sense of that word, I encourage people, our listeners, and the people that they talk to this about when they're hearing this, go to Shoppers and at any given time, look at their windows. We saw the Pride campaign through the roof for much longer than a month. And it's like it's like Shoppers is one of the talking billboards for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's unbelievable.
It's interesting because the Shoppers over here on 8th Street, right after Stephanie Foster's mom had died, inside the Shoppers in Rosewood, right after that, 2 days later, they had an Elvis impersonator performing at the Shoppers on 8th Street. And I was, it was so cringe. It was just so, and they're promoting, the jabs and everything else. And they have this Elvis impersonator performing live in store. Oh, it's just like, it literally makes me sick.
That's a wrap, folks. You've been listening to an Acres of Truth special edition podcast series. We would like to thank you so much for joining us in this journey. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with others on your social media platforms. Be sure to check out our website, acresoftruth.com, for more information on other podcasts and where you can find them. Additionally, feel free to send your questions or comments to info@acresoftruth.com. Thanks again for listening.